Hello beautiful humans and welcome to my August wrap-up. I read 15 books in August and I'm going to talk about them all here today. Here, let me give you, I stacked them all in a majestic stack. Ugh! God! I read all of these books. Also, we're filming outside, which feels like a terrible idea, and I have been opposed to it from the very beginning. So we may end up having to move inside halfway through, but I'm gonna appease Alec, and we're gonna be out here for a bit. So, okay. I do have, I wrote all my little reviews out in my notes app, so I might be looking down at my phone just a bit, but I'll try to do my best. The first book that I read in August was The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan, which is the first book in the Heroes of Olympus series. I give this book 3.5 stars. So this book follows 3 perspectives. There's Jason, who's the son of Zeus/Jupiter. There is Piper, who's the daughter of Aphrodite, and Leo, the son of Hephaestus. The main plot is them just essentially journeying across the country to save Hera/Juno from some Titans. The whole theme of the Titans kind of continues after the Percy Jackson series, as this kind of picks up where that series left off. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It was really fun. I always really like Rick Riordan books, and it was fun to get back into the world. But it did drag a bit in the middle, so, and I did really love Leo. Leo was my favorite. He's extremely funny, and I really appreciated him. Yeah, and so this book was also just an introduction to the more brutal Roman gods, in addition to following up the Greek gods. So yeah, it was just a really fun book. Again, dragged a bit, but honestly, for being over 500 pages, I read this in only a few days. So yeah, 3.5 stars. The next book I read in August was Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is a very popular literary fiction that is also very divisive. It follows Connell and Marianne as they navigate their mostly sexual relationship in high school and then into college. All in all, it was there were parts of this and bits of the writing that were really impactful and I really enjoyed, but for the most part I just found the characters so irritating and their lack of communication so irritating, and they just refused to talk to each other about things and just were passive aggressive and really annoying. And also, I don't know why authors make this decision, but the dialogue was not contained in quotation marks, and for some reason that just made it so hard for me to read. And this book took me 3 times as long as this book to read, and I don't know why, but it was just not really for me. I ended up giving it 2 stars. I don't know, it's just one of those that some people really love, some people really hate, and I unfortunately fall on the like it slightly less side of that scale. So, straying a bit out of order, but I just wanted to talk about these all at once, is I read the entire Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo, as well as Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. And I have some very differing opinions on all of these, so let's get into it. Basically, I'm gonna read what I wrote. So, this series is set in a Russian-inspired fantasy world in which there are people called Grisha who have the power to manipulate certain elements, or different parts of the world, like wind or fire or stuff like that. And the book follows Alina Starkov, who is in the First Army, which is just the non-Grisha in the world, and they're getting ready to cross this place called the Fold, which is essentially a tear in the landscape, which is swarming with these really disgusting man-eating monsters. And the crossing goes awry, and Alina, it's discovered that she has these powers that they haven't seen in a very long time, and she may be the key to destroying the Fold, and so she gets brought into the elite Grisha, the capital where all the Grisha train, and she meets the Darkling, who's this really morally at least in the first book he's very morally questionable. You don't really know what he's up to, and so it's all in this world of magic and wonder she gets swept up into. This, spoiler alert, Shadow and Bone is my favorite of all 4 of these books, and I know that's going to be a major surprise. My favorite part of Shadow and Bone, and what really made it special for me, was I really did enjoy the, like, training aspect of it, and the, like, getting her powers, and being at the capital, training with the other Grisha. I really enjoyed that part of it. All the, like, more romancy aspects of it were kind of lame. I think it's mostly just because I've read a lot of really good romance, that now these, like, kind of dinky YA romances thrown into these fantasy books aren't as exciting for me, but I could kind of take it or leave it. Like, it wasn't terrible. So I ended up giving Shadow and Bone 4 stars. And then I moved on to Siege and Storm, which is the second book, which is definitely less good than the first book. There's a lot of just faffing about the castle, being really worried about things, and not really doing anything. But the second book did include my favorite character in the series, who definitely you don't get enough of. And I know that King of Scars is about him, but his name is Nikolai, and he's this, like, bastard son of the king turned privateer pirate guy, and he is quite amazing, and was definitely the highlight of this book. So I gave Siege and Storm 3 stars, and then Ruin and Rising, which is the third book in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, I gave 3.5 stars, purely because I did like how it wrapped everything up. But again, this book was a lot. Like, most of it was just, like, getting places. I feel like there wasn't quite enough action in it for me. It wasn't quite as fast paced as I would have liked, and there was a lot of angst and not enough Nikolai, and so that was that. And then I went on and moved on to Six of Crows, which, as we know, everyone on BookTube loves, everyone on BookTube talks about constantly, and unfortunately wasn't as good as I was wanting it to be. It may have been me, because I was in this weird kind of reading slumpy thing towards the end of the month where I just wasn't really loving the books I was reading, and I've kind of still been struggling with it this month so far. But basically, Six of Crows is in the same, like, world, but follows a completely different cast of characters. There's basically been the emergence of this drug that magnifies the ability of the Grisha, but it's highly addictive, and it completely drains them of their power, eventually killing them. And so the story follows Kaz Bricker, who is a thief with a tragic backstory, and he has to put together this team of thieves and misfits to go break the creator of this really dangerous drug out of this, like, super high security prison. And so I really did enjoy the characters, and there's really complex character relationships, but I think it's a little bit misleading to just call this, like, a heist book, because most of it isn't about the heist. The heist is about the last 200 pages, like, maybe the last third, so most of it is, like, getting to the heist and, like, diving into those characters and their relationships and the world that they're in, which is really different part of the world than they're in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. It's a lot more brutal. So yeah, this is definitely not for the faint of heart. There was a point where I was reading it and I was like, he literally just yanked someone's eye out of his socket when I was talking to Alec. And so it's not, there's some gore, it's a bit gruesome, but overall, liked it. Not as much as I would have hoped. I ended up giving Six of Crows 3.5 stars, which I know is very shocking to a lot of you. Don't at me, it's fine. Okay, we had to take a quick break to change the camera battery, adjust some settings, maybe it looks slightly better now, and also put the laundry in the dryer. But we are back, and we are going to talk about some non-fantasy books for a minute. So first up is Last Flight by Julie Clark. This book, I'm just going to read what the Goodreads says about it, because like, for thrillers, I don't think that you should know very much about them going in, just in my opinion, but I think this little quote from Goodreads sums it up quite well. It says, "The story of two women, both alone, both scared, and one agonizing decision that will change the trajectory of both of their lives." Overall, I really enjoyed this book. The middle, once again, did drag for me because there's a lot of action at the beginning, a lot of action at the end, and the middle kind of goes back in time, and you kind of gives you some threads that she'll eventually weave together in the end in a really satisfying way, but the threads themselves are not that exciting to read about. But overall, I really enjoyed this. It was, like, slightly above average thriller for me. Once again, I'm just getting into thrillers, so I don't have a large pool of books to compare it to, but overall, really enjoyed it. I gave it, once again, 3.5 stars. There were a lot of 3.5-star books this month. I kind of teeter on the edge of believing in half stars or not, but I really think that there's a point, it's not a 3 and it's not a 4, it's 3.5. I don't do any other half stars, because I don't know, just the 3 and 4, there's so many books between a 3 and a 4. It's too much to try to just contain them in those categories, in my opinion. Next book I read was Atomic Love by Jenny Fields, which is set in Chicago in 1950 in the middle of the Cold War. And the story follows Rosalind Porter, who is a disgraced nuclear scientist filled with guilt about her participation in the Manhattan Project and hate for a man called Weaver who broke her heart and ruined her career in one fell swoop. Suddenly, a dashing FBI agent called Charlie comes and asks her to spy on Weaver because the FBI suspects that he is actually a Russian spy. For me, this book was like 50% spy thriller, 50% romance, and 100% beautifully written with intensely complex and compelling characters. I fell so in love with Rosalind and Charlie, and the writing was so easy to fall into. It's just so readable. I actually read this mostly in one day, and this is not that thin. This is a bit of a chunky boy, and I just could not put it down. I gave this book 5 stars. Once again, I don't know if it was me or the book, but it just really worked for me when I read it, and I'm not going to question that. The next book I read definitely wins the award for most surprising book of the month, and that is This Adventure Ends by Emma Mills. I read First and Then by Emma Mills a while ago and really didn't like it. I gave it 2 stars, if that. The dialogue in that one was just so wrong. It just felt so uncomfortable and so wrong for how teens actually talk. And it was so funny to then read this one, and the dialogue was really great. It's kind of a basic storyline, but it's just very readable and cute and enjoyable, and there are some deeper moments, there's some grief, but it's all about friendship, and the teen experience felt very true for me, which I always really enjoy. And I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. So next I read a couple of library books. The first I read on an audiobook, which was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, which is his memoir manifesto about being black and queer in America. This was really informative. I always think it's worthwhile to read stories from points of view other than your own, and I had a really good time listening to this. It's narrated by the author. I don't rate memoir because that's weird. You don't want to. I'm not about to rate someone's life, but I did really enjoy my listen of this. Another book I checked out from the library was Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a very strange book, which you hear everyone say when they talk about it. It follows a girl named Jam who's living in this town called Lucille where all the monsters have been eradicated. And then one day this hunter, this like big horned hunter guy, comes out of her mom's painting and insists that there's a monster not only in her town but in her best friend's house. None of the adults believe that monster still exists, so it's up to Jam and her friend to figure out what's going on. There's so much more complexity to it to that. For such a short book, it packs in such a punch. It was super different and interesting, but at the core of it is this great compassionate element that I really appreciated within all the relationships. Everyone there was so much love for each other, which is always so good to read. But yeah, all in all, I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. The next book I read was The Night Swim by Megan Golden, which follows Rachel Krall, a true crime podcaster with 2 very successful seasons under her belt. For her 3rd season, she decides to go to this small town in North Carolina and put her listeners in the jury box as she covers the trial of a local celebrity swimmer accused of raping the police chief's beloved granddaughter. And then while she's in town, she starts getting these mysterious notes from this woman who claims that her sister's death, which happened 25 years ago and was ruled an accident, is actually murder, and she is begging Rachel to look into it. This is another book I read in pretty much a day because I was so enthralled. I really loved the trial aspects of it. The characters weren't particularly well developed, but the plot was moving along so fast that I was able to stay fairly intrigued the whole time. Again, I read it in a very short span of time. So we had to move inside because the camera was overheating outside and was freaking out. So we're moving inside. I actually don't really remember where I was, but I gave this book 4 stars and really enjoyed it. It's pretty heavy as it is about a rape trial, but the mystery aspect, the trial aspect, the like cold case from 25 years ago getting solved aspect was all super interesting, and I really, really enjoyed this book. Next, I decided to read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is my first Agatha Christie book, and it's one of her standalones. This follows 10 people who get mysteriously invited to this island, and their host never shows up, and then throughout their stay there, secrets get revealed, and people start dying off one by one, and you don't know who's doing it, you don't know what's going on. Overall, once again, really enjoyed my experience reading this. The language does read slightly older, of course that's to be expected, and the characters weren't the most nuanced, but there's some bits in here that's just like, Agatha Christie just like knew what was up. It was a really fun reading experience, so I definitely recommend this book if you're looking to get into Agatha Christie, and I think I will definitely need to start reading some more of her books. Next, I listened to the audiobook of A Night to Surrender by Tessa Dare, which is the first book in the Spindle Cove historical romance series. This book centers around Spindle Cove, which is this seaside town where ladies of delicate constitutions go to rest and absorb the sea air. And it's basically for women who don't really fit in modern society. And the main character is Susanna, who's essentially controls the entire town. Like, it revolves around her, she's in charge of a lot of stuff, everyone listens to her and wants her opinion. Everything is running smoothly until this kind of hobbled earl named Bram quite literally explodes into town, and everything kind of gets turned upside down, and Susanna doesn't know what to do. There's barely any men in this town, and then this guy just comes exploding into the scene and tries to form this militia, and she's like, what are you doing? And he's just trying to get back his military career. I don't know, the plot is like kind of whatever, but Tessa Dare just writes historical romance like no one else. I love the way that all of her female characters have their own drive, their own wants and needs. They're very strong and self-assured, and that's so fun to read about in a time period where women's rights were fairly non-existent. So Tessa Dare is always a win for me. I know people don't particularly love this series, but I don't know, I just love the idea of this little seaside town and then just getting disrupted by all these men. I don't know, it was very fun read. I gave it 4 stars. And then finally, another book that slightly fell victim to my end of the month reading slump, where I just should have loved it more than I did, like Six of Crows, and that was Get a Life, Chloe Brown. This book follows Chloe Brown, who is a chronically ill computer geek who, after a near-death experience, decides that she needs to get a life. She needs to start doing things and taking risks and basically be less boring. So she writes this list of things that she wants to do to get a life. One of them includes riding a motorcycle, and her superintendent of her building just happens to own a motorcycle. They have a slightly grouchy relationship, and so she enlists him for help, and of course, love ensues. I really loved Chloe. Talia Hibbert's writing was wonderful. There's so much voice, so much humor, very fun to read. Zipped through this book. But once again, I'm not sure why I didn't rate it higher than I did. It gave it a 3.5 stars again, just like Six of Crows. I don't know, something about these 2 books just was weird for me. I definitely think I'll reread both of them at some point to just figure out like what is going on, why didn't I like these as much as I should have. But to be fair, 3.5 stars is a fairly good rating. Okay, so that is all the books that I read in August. Let me know if you enjoyed this format of me doing a little synopsis, doing a little bit of my thoughts about them, if you'd rather me just pick some highs and lows. Any feedback is appreciated. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you in my next one. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and see you later. Bye!